For the Greeks, someone who was strong enough to sin went ahead and sinned, which meant they did what they wanted to and enjoyed it, and for the Greeks, that was good. The Christian idea of virtue, which includes the idea of guilt and sin, meant that you want to do something real bad and you don't, and you're frustrated and filled with resentment towards those sinners who go ahead and do what they want to do. And you turn the name of your fault, cowardice, into a virtue. Really, you just didn't have the guts to go ahead and do what you wanted to do. Trying to make it sound even slimier than it is. But this is Nietzsche's argument. You didn't have the strengths to go ahead and pursue what you really wanted. And so your name for that inability is your virtue. You didn't do it. But we know that doesn't work out. We frequently, because we have several notorious cases. The Jimmy Swaggart case shows the most virtuous sometimes fall. But it's worse than that. As Nietzsche says, this Christian notion of virtue is a double trap. Because let's suppose someone who has the strength to pursue excellence goes ahead and does what they want to do and finds satisfaction. Then, because the whole field within which right and wrong is understood in the Christian era is different than the whole field within which right and wrong is understood in the earlier period, when you go ahead and do that, then you pay another price. Guilt. That's where you internally torment yourself for the very paradoxical and perverse reason that you did what you wanted to do. You go, damn, I'm so bad, I did what I wanted to do. You don't do what you want to do, and you feel, as it were, helpless, but a little bit smug, and then resentful towards others that do otherwise. That's resentment. Or you go ahead and do it, and then feel guilty and have resentment towards yourself. So Nietzsche talks about this reversal of values as a reversal of values from the Greek values. And the key word is virtue. Virtue is very differently understood in the Victorian era. And this is what Nietzsche talks about in the genealogy of morals. Is one of the things the argument does, whether you like it or not, or whether you accept it or not, and I've only outlined it in a kind of a snide, quick way here today. Whether you like it or not, the interesting part of Nietzsche's project is that what we could see, and I haven't done that in here, but what we could have presented as eternal problems of morality, in Nietzsche's account we become very aware that these so-called eternal problems change radically depending on where you happen to be in history. What gets called good is different if you happen to be in one society or one historical period and in another. Now that seems like the shocking claim that it's all relative, right? That's where Nietzsche's supposed to be so abominably bad for a real humanistic education. But it's all relative. Well, this is not a part of the argument. What Nietzsche is trying to show is that knowledge, truth, objectivity, and good and bad have conditions for possibility. And those conditions for possibility change. That doesn't destroy what seems to be someone who lives in the Victorian period's right to call someone a sinner. In fact, it's a condition for the possibility of them doing it. You see what I mean? It's not that everything is relative. It's that there are conditions within which evaluations take place that themselves require analysis. In other words, his account is not a moral theory, but it is a theory about how we have come to have the moral theories we do have. How we've come to have the ones that we do have. Freud paid a tremendous compliment to Nietzsche. Freud said that Nietzsche knew more about himself than any other human had ever known or was ever likely to know. Fairly smart guy. Nietzsche wasn't very bright. His main target was Christianity, and I'm going to now, we're going to return to a more contemporary critique of Christianity. And in this lecture, I'm going to present a little bit of Nietzsche's critique of Christianity. And the reason I'm going to do it and how it's connected with my earlier remarks is to this very day, in spite of the so-called secularization of the world, values, especially in the United States, in our culture, and again we're working for a theory of the present, are still by and large Christian values. Those are the official public ones, right? The official public values. Again, the gap between how they're practiced and what they are, all a matter of dispute. But growing out of the discourse of Hegel, there are other critiques, as I say, Nietzsche's is one. He focuses on the values that surround Christianity. So I'm going to talk about him a little bit more now, and then in the next lecture I want to talk about a Christian who has a criticism of modern Christianity. So you'll get both sides. You'll get one guy who's sort of, you'll know before I'm through here, thinks Christianity was a mistake. From the standpoint of the species, it was a mistake. He goes, well, not quite, a 2,000-year mistake. I mean, it was more than that. It was a little bit more catastrophic. Nietzsche thinks that among the other ill effects of Christianity, one of them is very banal. It's the habit of bad reading. He explains how many of us are raised in churches where when we bother to read, now this won't hold for many of our Jewish friends or people who believe other religions, but in the Christian tradition, we're taught to read the Old Testament, where every stick of wood, every stone, every snake, every bird, every bat is a sign of Jesus. And Nietzsche points out that this inculcates in us habits of bad reading. It does. And if you think about it, he says, well, now, in that book there, and then the preacher reads some just unintelligible piece of the Old Testament. The locusts have no king, they fly, and that means Jesus is coming. And you go, yeah, okay. Nietzsche says this makes you not read well. Being brought up this way tends to make you not read well. It's worse than that, however, and that's that the way Christianity presents itself is as a doctrine of love and compassion. Certainly that has something to do with its appeal to our national character. And that's good, to a doctrine of love and compassion. Nietzsche's concern in this book, The Genealogy of Morals, is to show that what's beneath that mask of love and compassion is really a doctrine of resentment and hatred. And I think I can make that come alive for you with some pretty banal examples. One would be Jerry Falwell, who discusses homosexuals. He loves them. How many people believe he really loves them? See, I don't. I think he hates them. His way of hating them is to love them. That's the trick Nietzsche was after. The trick about how resentment, envy, and hatred can be masked with these words, love and compassion. It's an important argument today because I think we've become a suspicious culture. Nietzsche's been called one of the masters of suspicion. Paul Ricoeur, the philosopher, called him a master of suspicion. Ricoeur is a Christian as well. He just thinks that reading these books is the mediation through which any modern kind of faith would have to pass. You'd have to read them, understand them before you'd know what you meant by having faith. In any case, Nietzsche sees this dynamic of resentment and envy as being, as it were, the unspoken or the code, beneath the code of Christianity. And so for the first time in the course, I'm going to pull out a section of a book that I want to look at, if I can find the correct quote here. This is from The Genealogy of Morals. In this edition, it's on page 48. It's section 15 of the first essay. Nietzsche's discussing Christian love, as it were, and faith, and hope. Nietzsche, in his rather cynical way, says, in faith in what? In love of what? In hope of what? These weak people, someday or other, they too intend to be strong. You ever heard an evangelist and got that feeling that while they were real meek, someday they intended to be real strong? That's the idea. There's no doubt of that, because they say their kingdom is coming. They term it the kingdom of God because, after all, one should be so humble in all things. To experience that kind of duplicity, one needs to live a long time. Dante, I think, committed a crude blunder when, with a terror-inspiring ingenuity, he placed the gateway of his hell the inscription, "I too was created by eternal love." At any rate, there would be more justification for placing above the gateway to the Christian paradise and its eternal bliss the inscription, "I too was created by eternal hate," provided a truth could be written above the gateway to a lie. What constitutes the bliss of this paradise? Well, Nietzsche goes on to quote not Cherry Falwell, but St. Thomas Aquinas, great teacher, saint, certainly knew more about Christianity than I do, or most of us. Thomas Aquinas says that the blessed in the kingdom of heaven will see the punishments of the damned in order that their bliss be more delightful for them. At that moment in Nietzsche's text, something sort of creepy should come up your back. You should go, St. Thomas Aquinas said that in heaven, our chief bliss would be that we could see all those mean people that got us while we were alive, having all that stuff ripped off of them eternally, forever. And Nietzsche's text wants to bring alive for us the barbarism, the hatred that must be buried in such a doctrine of love as its core. It's a very frightening argument, but it isn't limited, and I don't want to limit it, to a set of Christian values specifically, but to certain duplicitous ways in which words of value are used in general. The way that a bomb can be dropped lovingly, surgically. See, when you cut someone in surgery, you do it to heal them, right? That's what a surgical strike is. That's what a surgeon does. Cuts the cancer out, leaves the patient alive. But that's not all a surgical strike is. This field within which good and bad appear so clearly to us, or supposed to, I think some of us may be getting a little confused, but in which values are supposed to be so clearly appear to us, may very well have these duplicities built within them. A surgical strike may not be like surgery with Dr. Kildare. It could turn out there could be some resentment and hatred beneath it. There might be, possibly. Nietzsche is not trying to argue demonstratively or to prove a syllogism, but rather to raise suspicions, to raise the kinds of suspicions that, as I say, I think many of us have when we look at the content of the values that have come up to us, through our traditions. That's what Nietzsche is powerfully and importantly good for. Not to deny, again, not to say all is relative, but to try to remind us of something of the origins of what we call good and bad, right and wrong, and so on. By the way, these values have come out in other contexts. I remember in an earlier war, General Westmoreland saying, we had to destroy the village in order to save it. But it was not an irony. He meant it. I mean, so did the early Christian communities that settled in this country mean it. That for a witch's own good, one had to dunk her repeatedly in water. Now, we've come a long way since then, haven't we? Because now we lock people away in prisons and in institutions, torment them with drugs, lock them up in the most dangerous environments, have more people in prison in this country per capita than any country in the world except South Africa. I don't know. They may be, the new South Africa may be ahead of us. No. But we haven't gotten as far ahead in this regard as we think, and this argument has been updated by people like Mikhail Foucault. We still have the idea that we would send someone to prison in order to rehabilitate them. Now we're getting to be more honest about that. We're getting a little more barbaric, and for Nietzsche that would be better. That'd be a little more honest. We're sending them to prison because we're scared of them and that we know if they go there, really bad things will happen to them.